There are a lot of talking points to mention about that UFC 304 event, and especially what Dana White said in the post-event press conference. But one of the big major talking points is the fact that Muahmmad Mokaev is now a free agent after not being offered and confirmed to not be getting another contract from the UFC. So in this video, I wanted to discuss that situation and then talk about every single option that Muahmmad Mokaev actually now has, because I have not just one or two promotions that he could go and sign to, 9 different promotions that Muahmmad Mokaev could go and sign to. Because if you guys don't know, my specialty in this sort of MMA space actually isn't necessarily UFC content. It is contender series and also non-UFC content. That is what I do for We Want Picks. And with Muahmmad Mokaev, I tell you guys, he has a lot more option than what I think a lot of people think. But I originally wanted to go over the comments that Dana White has said about Mokaev. Apparently, it's not just the fact that he's a quote-unquote boring fighter, and Dana actually even mentions that when he does say that he's going to release him. He says that the matchmakers aren't a big fan of him, and for many reasons, not just because of his fighting style. There's a lot of people who shoot takedowns in this business, he said after the clash. There are a lot of the guys that fight with that type of style, but it's a lot more than that. He's not under contract anymore. I think PFL is going to get a great undefeated guy. Good luck to him. I believe there was further comments about how the fact that the matchmakers don't like him because of things that have happened outside of the cage, and that kind of just does to allude the fact that the matchmakers don't want anything to do with him and how he has attacked Manel Karp outside of the promotion. I know that other fighters have been released for this reason. There is a bantamweight that Chase Hooper was talking about on Twitter, whose name you guys probably do know, but I'm not going to throw out anything because apparently it turns out there's more to that situation, which will probably come out in the future. But yes, there has been more than one fighter being released or not re-signed to contracts, not just because of the fact that they've lost, but because of the fact that they have been high maintenance or have been, I guess, maybe in Muahmmad Mokaev's instance, a little bit immature. And it sounds like he was a lot to deal with, maybe in contract negotiations. Apparently at the PI, it seems like maybe he started fights or started disagreements, and the UFC just doesn't want anything to do with that. I feel like one big promotion, well, not necessarily a big promotion, but a promotion that would be worth mentioning is the KHK MMA team. The guy that runs this KHK MMA team is actually royalty in Bahrain, and he actually funds KHK MMA and owns Brave Combat Federation, but that is one of the last promotions I'm going to talk about. So let's talk about options for Muahmmad Mokaev. Bear in mind, this guy is 12-0. He is probably a top 10 flyweight across the entire planet right now, and also went 23-0 as an amateur. So he is going to be a hot commodity. I'm pretty sure he's got a pretty big fan base as well. Let's move on to the first one that Dana White mentioned, is the PFL. I think that PFL probably isn't actually the number one landing zone for Mokaev. Now, I'm willing to be proven wrong here, but the reason is the PFL don't actually have a flyweight division. Would they create a flyweight division to make space for Muahmmad Mokaev to be potentially their champion or fight in their promotion, or maybe he can be the face of the PFL MENA, which they've got now, which is going to be taking place in the Middle East, or maybe he can be the face of PFL Europe as well. Or they can create a whole new PFL division at 125 pounds and he can fight for them, because the PFL, to my understanding, they don't have a bantamweight division either. So, I don't know, Mokaev can't fight at 135 pounds for them either. So I feel like PFL, they're going to have to create a whole new division to make space for him, or only have him fight in bonus fights, if that makes sense. So I could see them as being a landing zone for him, but I don't think that they are necessarily the number one option. Another promotion that would have to do the same to make space for Mokaev is KSW, a massive promotion in Poland, probably a top 4 promotion in the world in terms of size. They are massive. You've probably heard of KSW before. I'd be very surprised if you haven't, but they don't have a flyweight division either. A big promotion in Russia that I think would be very keen to pick him up, and actually I think is probably the promotion he's most likely to sign to, is ACA, because not only do they have the funding to afford a contract that Muahmmad Mokaev is probably going to ask for, they also have the competition for him. Their current champion right now is Kurban Gadziev. He's 19-3. He's a flyweight, of course, their flyweight champion, but not only do that, do they have a very good undefeated fighter as well in Azamat Kirafov. And as you guys can see, these guys fight good competition all the time for ACA. You can see that their roster is deep, especially at 125. They are based in Russia as well, and to my understanding, Muahmmad Mokaev, although he was training out of Manchester, actually, I believe he also he was born in Dagestan. So yes, you could see him fight for ACA. I think ACA does have the funding, and the reason why I know that is because they actually outbid Edward Vartanyan to get him back onto their contract. The UFC was interested in signing one of their lightweights, Vartanyan, and ACA ended up offering him more money than the UFC were willing to pay. So, ACA, I think that's a very big kind of landing zone, and they have the competition. Ryzen is another one, and I guess this kind of does pay into the PFL or Bellator idea, because if you guys didn't know, Bellator and Ryzen were very close. In fact, they actually have collaborated multiple different times, especially over the New Year's events. Ryzen is also huge as well. I believe that they had, at Super Ryzen 3, it come out on Twitter, they had 48,000 people were in attendance for Super Ryzen 3. And if you look at it, there were only 8 fights, and overall, the event wasn't actually like a stacked event, if that makes sense. Now, they do actually have 2 fighters on that roster, which I'm going to mention very, very soon, but apparently more than 40,000 people were in attendance for Ryzen in Japan. I could see Mokaev being a guy that could fight there, and a guy that I think you could just put him in there with right now is a pretty popular fighter, former UFC fighter John Dodson. Of course, he is now fighting for Ryzen as a flyweight, and he's also been doing some bare knuckle boxing, which he did as well last night. But he's been fighting for Ryzen recently. Another fighter as well is, of course, Kyoji Horiguchi, who I believe is the current flyweight champion. I believe he defeated Makoto Takahashi, Makoto Shinryu, to win that bout, and then he defended it against the Bellator champion Sergio Pettis. So I have Kyoji Horiguchi. He could just fight for the title now. He could fight Makoto Takahashi right now, 24 years old, another very, very good prospect right now in MMA, very young Japanese flyweight prospect. Hiromasa Ujikubo just recently actually beat Makoto Takahashi, so you could do that. Title eliminator potentially for Ryzen if you were to do that, or you could give him Sergio Pettis, who is, of course, the former Bellator champion. I believe he did fight. Maybe he didn't fight Kyoji Horiguchi at 125 pounds like I thought he didn't. Never mind. I guess he could still fight him at bantamweight, but that was also an idea that I did have. Kyoji Horiguchi, though, has fought recently at 125 pounds, and that could be a fight that you could do. Lots and lots of options at Ryzen. Another option is, of course, one championship. Now, I've said this before, and I will say it again. One Championship isn't doing as much MMA as they used to, and it is because One Championship is currently getting funded by Bahrain, and I believe that the funders or the investors in One Championship have actually told them that if they don't turn profitable, they're just going to stop giving them money, because One Championship is burning money right now. So they've actually just stopped giving all of their guys on massive MMA contracts fights. It's actually been a pretty big controversy online if you've really been on the lookout. So maybe we do see Muahmmad Mokaev go there, but I feel like if he was to go to One Championship, he would not fight often, and if at all. I know a lot of MMA fighters are trying to get out of their One Championship deals, but I was thinking Demetrius Johnson's kind of a no-brainer. I believe actually at one, they don't fight at 125, they fight at 135 with that hydration clause, which just never works anyway, but yeah, I guess you could do him versus Demetrius Johnson. I know a lot of people will be thinking one is like a top kind of landing zone for him. I'm actually not too sure. A promotion I personally really want to see him fight for is Octagon. I would love to see Muahmmad Mokaev sign to Octagon. Octagon, in my opinion, is one of the bigger promotions that just people don't talk about. These guys are big. This event here, I believe it's coming up in September, Octagon 60, is going to be in the front of a stadium of over 55,000 people. Or maybe it's not this one. This one's in front of an arena. I believe it's Octagon 62 is going to be in the stadium in front of 55,000 people in Frankfurt, Germany. And not only that, do Octagon do events all over Europe, they also do them in the UK, where Muahmmad Mokaev could fight as well in his hometown. Octagon, I mean, he could sign and debut on this event in October, I believe it is, coming up in front of 55,000 people. what a better way for him to potentially kind of make his name known and show, I guess, the MMA world that he can still fight and he still can have big opportunities outside of the UFC. Now, for Octagon, I will have to say their flyweight division is very shallow. This is their rankings right now. Sam Creasy is the champion. I think you would probably just have to give him a championship fight immediately. Their number 1 or number 2 ranked guy is Beno Adamia, who doesn't have the best record, but he has been on a big run recently. And then also they have Elias Garcia, who is a former UFC fighter who lost a couple of times in the UFC, but has looked pretty good since then. So I feel like you would have to bolster the roster a little bit, and there's no better way to do it than to sign Muahmmad Mokaev to Octagon MMA. I would personally love to see him fight there. I rate Octagon very highly, and they do events in big arenas all of the time. I remember watching Octagon for the first time when I was doing tape on Machej Pinaz in, I believe, 2022, or maybe earlier. I couldn't believe how big the crowds were that he was fighting in front of. So Octagon MMA is an option. Another one is UAE Warriors. UAE Warriors, of course, is a promotion based in, I believe in the UAE and Abu Dhabi. They do events all over the world, though. They've done one in Brazil recently, but for the most part, they're doing events in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi, which is where Mokaev trains because he is affiliated with KHK MMA, which is in Bahrain. I don't know if they do have a champion, sorry. Their champion is Iago Ribeiro. I feel like you would just have to give him a title shot immediately, and that is probably who you would do him against. He did recently win the vacant title over the Japanese fighter Yamato Fujita, and he has been on a pretty decent little win streak recently. So I think that is an event, a promotion he could go to. He could go to Cage Warriors. This is where it gets a little bit iffy because Cage Warriors has a deal with UFC Fight Pass. So if they really don't like him, which I don't think that they would get in the way of this, but Cage Warriors I think is another option. Do I think that it's probably the best option? No disrespect to Cage Warriors in any way, but I do believe that there are bigger promotions out there. But they also have a pretty solid division. And Shajidul Haq is their champion. He's a very talented fighter. I think you could do him versus Haq. You could even put him in there against Michelle Martignoni. Sam Creasy's now with Octagon. And Nicholas LeBlond recently won after being offered the original title shot, but it got cancelled. So maybe you could do any of those fighters there in Cage Warriors. Brave Combat Federation I mentioned earlier. They actually currently don't have a champion. Another international promotion. I mean, if you look at these guys, they are doing events everywhere. I mean, this is an event in Ecuador, France, Spain. Is that Indonesia? In Jakarta, Indonesia, in Bahrain, Brazil, Bahrain a couple of times. I believe that is that. No, I'm gonna get the country wrong, so we're just gonna double check. Slovenia. I was going to say something else, I'm glad I didn't do that. I believe this is in Mocha, which I believe is in... Is that French territory? I actually don't even know where that country is, I'll be honest with you guys. So, in Africa, potentially, in France, I thought it was French area, I don't know. In China, in Pakistan, that one is. They've got one coming up in Bulgaria, the Netherlands, Slovenia, Spain. The point is, Brave Combat Federation is owned by, to my understanding, royalty in Bahrain, who also owns KHK. Mokaev apparently trains at KHK. It does make sense if that was to happen. They don't necessarily have a champion, but one of the better fighters that I noticed that had fought recently for Brave was Marciano Ferreira at 125 pounds, where he got a very massive win over a 15-2 opponent, and he has, prior to that, got a bunch of big wins as well. I'm sure that there probably are better potential opponents for Mokaev at Brave, but I just wanted to go over every single potential landing zone for Muahmmad Mokaev and just kind of let you guys know that although he's out of the UFC, and it is kind of sad to see, like, I do think that this is going to be a decision that's going to age poorly, because I do strongly believe that Muahmmad Mokaev would have been a UFC champion eventually. Now, do I think it would have happened this year or next year? Probably not, because I have said before I was waiting to fade Mokaev. I actually picked Cup to beat him. Wasn't a good pick, but, you know, that's kind of my thoughts on Mokaev. I wasn't convinced that he was an elite level fighter right now, but he's 23. He's probably would have been a UFC champion in 2 or 3 years. So yeah, I think the UFC, I think it's one of those decisions that I think could age poorly, but there must be a lot more going on in the background than what we know about. But I just wanted to let you guys know there's options, man. And although the UFC definitely is the biggest promotion in the world, and it's not even close, there are promotions out there aside from the PFL that could pick him up as well. Let me know what you think of this video, and with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one.